Wonderful. I think I am live. I'm super excited about this video today. It's the start of a new season, the 2022 season. I'm just checking if my video is streaming. 22, oh, goodness, 2022 Formula One season, right? And last year, when I watched the Formula One, I really became interested and intrigued in the drivers' interviews that the journalists have with them and the words they use. So, for those of you who do not know me, I'm a mental performance coach and I do work with athletes and coaches. But I specifically work around the language people use, how they speak, and how that influences what you're doing and how you perform and where you want to go. So I'm just checking here if everything is fine while I'm speaking with the introduction. So we take in the world through our five senses. I've spoken a lot about that, and what happens then is information gets processed in our brain, and it comes out in the language we speak. How we interpret our world comes out in the language we speak, and then also our behavior and actions that we take. So really became intrigued. I especially listened. I guess maybe I'm biased. I especially listened to interviews with Max Verstappen and interviews with Lewis Hamilton. Obviously, they were the two that was fighting for the title, and a little bit between the team principals, not so much, but those were the two that I really focused on. And I decided this year that why not look at the interviews, analyze the interviews. But what is important to understand is that I'm coming from a mental performance perspective. The same way I would work with my clients and work with people, that's the space that I'm coming from. Now, a lot of people that don't understand that or have not experienced it themselves might come back and say, yes, like, for example, so many times I would have made the remark last year and say that Lewis Hamilton just never answers, well, not never, that's a generalization, but most part. He would never answer the question that the journalist asked him. And people would say, oh, but that's just how Lewis is. No, that doesn't, that analogy, it's not that simple. Really, the words that people use is an extension of what's going on inside of your mind. That's how it is. That's how science has proven it, and so many things that we can learn if we look at that. So I looked at all the interviews. So just a few things before I start. I've looked at all the interviews of the preseason testing, both Barcelona, both Bahrain, and also what they call the drivers' reactions, like they would go in onto the grid in the paddock, speaking to the drivers, quick chat, how was the drive, that type of thing. But then there's a formal drivers' press conference. So those were the two that I used. Whether I have all of the press conferences, whether I was able to catch all of the videos where they got the reactions from the drivers, I don't know, because they are posted all over the place, right? There are different channels and news channels that would post the same thing. So I think I have most of it. Like I said, do I have everything? I do not know. I will probably watching the live stream through Formula One TV starting this weekend. I will probably have a better handle on whether it's all of the information or not. So that was the one thing. The second thing is, when they do have these driver feedback, they do not post the question that the journalist asks. So I do not know what's the question that the journalist asked. Sometimes you can sort of figure out what was the question, but you never want to assume, because the response that you get in communication 101, the response that you get is only as good as the question that's been asked. So that also I keep in mind, because I've seen journalists ask like 3 questions in one sentence, and then it's like, okay, which one do you want now? And it sometimes can be confusing. That was the other thing. So let's start. I have 12 pages of interviews typed out. So let's start with the first one. The first one I have is 23rd of February 22, it was the Drivers Day 1 reaction, and I'll post the links to those videos. You can go back and check them in the description box below as well. The journalist asked Max Verstappen, well, obviously, I don't know what was the question, but what was interesting, and I think I've picked that up last year as well, the difference between um, the words that Lewis Hamilton uses when he describes things, the way he deflects information away from him or questions away from him, versus Max Verstappen is just straight to the point. You ask him a question, he'll answer the question. And also the words he used. So when, especially during both of these weekends, Max would said, yeah, we're getting used to the car. They're busy getting a general understanding of how the car is behaving. And then he uses words like, it's working quite well, things are working quite well, good start, holding up. Now, when you look at, for those of you who are familiar with metaphors of movement, I'm not an expert on that, disclaimer. Very interesting topic because it's the metaphors we use and the literal meaning it has in our life. So when you speak about holding up, we see how everything is held up or how things are holding up. Holding up means you support it. It's something that you support. And what is interesting throughout all of this, I'll show you, is that um, it's almost like the difference between the two. It's like there's a camp in the middle, and for Lewis, it's always coming from base camp and the struggle to go up. And for Max Verstappen, it's like this adventurous journey coming down into base camp, right? It's that's sort of the difference between the two, how they speak and the words they use. So that was interesting for me. Then the second one was on the 24th of February, that the preseason testing press conference. So the first question that Lewis Hamilton was first in the room, and obviously they're not together. Interesting, right? So the first question the journalist asked was like, "Welcome to the Formula One season. It's number 16 for you." And he asked him, "How excited and energized are you coming into this one?" Obviously, number 16th. And then Lewis went on, just he greeted everybody, nice to see everybody, type of thing. And he mentioned, yeah, I think we have just this morning arriving, looking down the pit lane, looking at all of the different cars. And then he starts sort of deflecting the question away from him. I think it's one of the most exciting and interesting seasons. So it's talking about something away from him, the season, that thing that's on the other side. And then he speaks about it's interesting to see where everyone comes out. He's talking about other people. Yet the question was, how excited and energized are you? Right? And that's what I mean when I say that he for the most part, would deflect the question away from him. Um, then he speaks, and then the journalist asks him again about the preseason and how things are going, the big rule changes, and the question about does he feel that there's curiosity and intrigue going into the race, the first race, with the big rule changes that they had, and then again he said. Because you're asking the question, is there excitement? It's almost like, are you excited? There's all of these changes. How do you feel? Type of question, right? And then Lewis just said, I think every year is exciting. Of course, in previous years, it was an evolution. Now, that was an important, interesting word that he used, because throughout, and I'll mention it, throughout he used, if you look at the word evolution, it means still in development. Now, yes, the technical aspect of Formula One, they are absolutely in a developmental weekend, and a lot of development throughout the year. But you have to remember that in your mind, you have what we would call time points in your life. When you look at memories that you have, also your mind will always put a time frame to it. There will be a start of that, let's say, memory, and there will be a stop date. So even though you have a technical project, when I speak about technical project, we talk about the actual Formula One, the technical business of Formula One. You have that entire project that's in development. What happens, let's say the experience you have now will have a start and an end date, now, like in this moment or in this weekend. But he has this concept and words that he used, that it's like everything is still in development. There's nothing that has a start or a finish. Another way I can explain it to you is if you come into, this is just an example, I don't say it is like that, but if you come into a sporting weekend, let's use Formula One, um, having a car ready to start on track for your first testing round, there was a start and a finish for that to happen. And that's what I mean by, even within the big project development, there's pieces of things that, or experiences that will have a start and a stop date. So, but he keeps on speaking about evolution, development, as if it's still this big thing that's still moving along. It doesn't have a definite start and a stop date. The thing with that is, if you do if you have an activity or a task you need to do for the day, or an assignment you need to do for the day or for the week, doesn't really matter the time frame, or a goal you want to meet, if you don't have a definite stop date, then you would not know whether you've achieved what you came out to do. That's the danger of something like that, and thinking that way, and thinking, okay, I just want to get through the day. So it's like, okay, getting through the day, what does that mean? How would it look like for you to just get through the day? And at the end of the day, how would you know you got through the day? So there must be something definite in terms of a stop uh, event, if you can call it like that. Anyway, so evolution. Then is, yeah, he go on about the car. He speaks about the car. He speaks about the different things that he sees out there. He speaks about they will figure out why certain teams have chosen a certain route. And then so he speaks about other people, other things, other cars. And then he says that, and again, you have absolutely no idea where you stand. Coming back to metaphors of movement, if you literally take that statement, not knowing where you stand literally depicts confusion. It depicts that maybe you feel out of place. And you know what? I wish sometimes, like, I can speak with these people, or actually coach them through, because you'll find these things out. So but it depicts using terminology like, I don't know where I stand. It depicts like confusion. It depicts not knowing whether you are stable in the base where you stand on, right? So yeah, that was interesting. And then he asked again, the journalist asked again a question about the big regulation change in 2014. Again, I wonder though if the journalist wanted to get an answer from him about himself, because he asked again, taking that big step, because they've been part of the regulation change that came out in 2014. Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes was part of that. So he sort of wanted to know, are they excited about this new one? I sort of asked him the question again. And then he said, like, he mentioned, like, okay, if you think back, or if you're just going back was the words that he used, sort of. So you have to understand, from a mental performance coach perspective, when people start to use these words, they are attached to, so not everything and everybody, but they are attached to something in the past. That's why they use these words. And then again, he says, you don't know where everyone stands at the moment. Again, that analogy of, if you think about where you are physically standing, you don't know, are you on the right place? You don't know where you are. It can again depict confusion. Remember now, a lot of these things are subconscious, right? So it's not like he is deliberately using these words because that's how we feel. And that brings me back to what I said in the beginning is, we subconsciously take in all of this information from our environment, what people are speaking and what people are saying, and we internalize it, and it comes out in our actions and the words we use. And then again, he used the word like, now specifically start developing, which was interesting, that it sort of, this whole thing about still in progress, which makes one wonder though, did they came into the testing being ready at least for the testing, right? not a single team was ready at that time for the first race coming this weekend. But obviously you go into the testing weekend for testing, so you want to be ready for that testing. That would have been your goal. Okay, so then the journalists asked him, started to go into, if you listen to some of the other interviews that Lewis did, when he went off the grid end of last year, he didn't speak to social media for 2 months. He didn't have any contact with anybody for 2 months. And they went a little bit into that. So, but here's what was the most interesting thing. You could immediately see the state change in Lewis. Now, when we speak about a state change, when you speak with somebody and you make eye contact with them, and right, and you see them, you would have been there when you speak with somebody and you say, and you just see in their body their body movement or their behavior or their language or in their face, and you tell yourself, oh gosh, I said the wrong thing now, because you saw something in them that shifted their mood, and that's what we call a state change. So as they moved into this whole thing, he asked about, you went to spend time with your family during the winter season. Was there anything, again, he asked him actually, was there anything that your mom or dad said, or any words of wisdom that they gave to you that have stuck with you, obviously coming into the new season, that keep you motivated? Um, so he didn't answer that question at all, because then the journalist asked him, or was there a complete ban on speaking about Formula One? And he went into that. He said there wasn't a ban. It was the last thing he wanted to speak about. And then what was interesting, he started speaking about what he said is, which I know sometimes in life we get so focused and stuck into certain things like work, and we forget to do those things. He was speaking about spending time with his family, and all of the family was there, and just being present and in the moment. And he said it was a great time of just refreshing with them, really. Now, it was in that moment that you could see that state change immediately. Now, what was interesting, and I'll speak about that going forward at some point, but you could, they have their masks on for the press conference. And so you can only just focus on the top part of their face, which is great, because uh, you have to concentrate a little bit more to see things like eye cues, eye movements, and stuff like that, which I'm not going to go into today. But if you almost like slow down the video, you could immediately see how he has changed. When he speaks about his face looks completely different when he speaks about himself, and he feels comfortable with that, what he's saying. And which was, I mean, you cannot, well, I want to say you cannot miss it, but it's if you're not used to picking that up, it might take some practice to pick that up. But what was interesting is, at that point, they asked somebody else a question, and at that point, Lewis chimed in and said to the, because at that, up and until that point, the camera shot was up until here, like just their faces. You could clearly see their faces. And up and until at that point, then Lewis said, before somebody else started to speak, Lewis said, and he asked the cameraman to zoom back up, and he said, because our sponsors is not in the shot. He wants a head shot from here, from shoulders and up, so that they can see the sponsors. But he made the remark and said, don't go too close, or you could almost see our pores. And you cannot, like, I wonder whether Lewis could see that state change on the camera and could see that vulnerability, and he got uncomfortable with that. I wonder. We will never know. But it was interesting how that came out. Okay, so the journalist then go on, ask again about the winter break, and switching off with the family. And yeah, all of that. And yeah, you just may go on and sit naturally, think at the end of season for those that are around, because he spoke about the fact that he's 40. Has he thought about, is he going to race beyond those years, because Max Verstappen's contract has been extended, so it would take him to his 40s. So that's sort of where that came from. But what was also interesting is that Lewis, he said that I'll always evaluate my options, and he has made a commitment to the team. But he says, I love being part of a team and I love working with, and I've said it so many times, but working with everyone towards a common goal. Never, at least in the interviews that I've listened, never ever did Lewis said, I love racing. He would say, I love what I do. I love being part of a team. I love working towards a common goal. But never ever did he at any time said, I love racing. So one has to wonder what role that will play going forward into the season. If you, for those of you who've been in one of my classes before, you would know that if you, when you have an emotion, which is the chemical reaction that happen in your brain, and you attach meaning to that, that's when you actually feel the feeling in your body, because right, there's a meaning, like literally attached to whatever emotion you have. Motion and feeling is not really the same thing, although we use it interchangeably, but scientifically speaking, it's not the same thing. But yeah, the whole fact that there are instances we in a split second of a moment, maybe one or two sentences, where Lewis is very comfortable speaking about himself, but not it's not himself and F1 racing. It's himself and mindset and being centered and being at peace, but not at all when it comes to the technical aspects of F1 racing and himself, which makes you wonder that how much does he really see himself in that role. Or because if you see yourself what we call as a outside person of this thing that's happening there, you don't have that connection and attachment that you really want to take yourself to higher heights, which is a topic, completely different topic on its own. Anyway, then again, the journalist asked him, do we need proper definitions about racing rules? Obviously, referring to what happened end of last year. Spoke about who have the rights to corners, because for those of you who followed, there has been some incidents around both Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton getting into a corner, who had the right of the corner, who passed whom, who was not supposed to, and who illegitimately passed whom, and things around that. But then he said, I want to see more women in the stewards room. Didn't answer the question at all. So then he brought it back to some sort of social justice cause for women. And I don't think we have any. I think maybe last year was one or two. So that's it. And we need more women in the stewards room. Um, and then Daniel Ricciardo gave a comment. And then after that, he came back and said, okay, we need to get non-biased stewards, which again doesn't really answer the question, but is attached to the question. This was a better answer. Again, probably listening already to what the others had to say, and then thought about what he could say. Then he just asked him if he bumped into Max. He said no, probably not going to see him. He saw him from a distance, probably not going to see him this weekend. And then they spoke about the grid moment that they're not going to do anymore. For those of you who don't know, the grid moment is where at the end of 2019, the whole 2020, the whole, well, it was instituted in 2020, the whole George Floyd issue and standing for social justice, and we race as one, and this whole BLM movement. They have this ritual before the start of the race where some can kneel, others don't have to, and then they have their moment of I don't know what you would call it. They have scrapped that from Formula One. I totally agree with that, because that's where you get those grey areas of politics in sport. So that is what they were talking about. And then Lewis just mentioned about the whole idea around. He agrees with that. There needs to be action, and so I mean, just having a gesture is not going to change the world, which is great. Okay, and then on the 24th, that the testing day 2 press conference with the drivers. Then the journalist asked Max Verstappen how it went yesterday. Give us your thoughts how it went yesterday. And then Lewis said it's always a bit of a question mark initially how you're going to do in the first day, but I think it was so. Yeah, again, he speaks about it was very positive. You're getting to know the car, so become familiar. It sounds positive. Getting up to speed, which means that there's progress, and understanding how to drive the car. And he says it was positive and enjoyable, and it's almost like this little crazy Max Verstappen, typically how he would experience his world, this adventurous thing that he's busy with. Um, then the journalist asked, we had predictions of the cars need to be set up very stiff from the ground effect. And they were speaking about the car that are really sluggish going into the corners with the braking and everything, and the weight, all of that. And then Max Verstappen just said, he said, yeah, the car is definitely a bit stiffer than before, but I don't mind. The car is quite enjoyable. Again, speaking about, I almost want to say, use happy words, exciting words, intriguing words. He's almost like this little adventurer that goes out on a journey. You don't know what you're going to find, right? But he doesn't. He doesn't care to fight the lion that comes around the corner. So yeah, that's what he and use the words like nice, things are a bit easier. So for it's almost like I said when I use the analogy, it's like he's coming downhill, man. He's coming downhill to base camp, and it's just one big enjoyable adventure for him, based on the words that he used. Stuff are more under control, things are fine, words that he used. Then they said, the journalist asked him, over the course of the season, did you set aside any specific time to reflect on what has happened last year? What do you think you might do better? What not? And then he just came back. He just mentioned that there's not always one single thing you want to change, but there are, it's like a holistic approach. There are a lot of things that you want to change, but you have to take it step by step. Um, and spoke about general experience that's useful and that will help you. And then he also used things like, you want to get on top. There's stuff that you want to get on top of as a driver. Um, Getting on top of something shows that you know when well, if you think back to the days, sporting days, where you stood on a podium, stood higher than anybody else. When you take a photo, you stand on the step, you stand up higher than other people. You almost feel a little bit like proud, a little bit. So when people talk about, use the analogy or the metaphor of standing on top, standing, that's where they really see themselves. Then the journalist asked him, yeah, I don't have to go through that. Then they spoke about Michael Messi, the sacking of Michael Messi. I'm not going to go through that. But Max Verstappen actually gave a very good answer. He did say he doesn't agree with it. I guess you could probably go back and compare it with answers that Lewis have given, because I'm pretty sure that question has been asked to Lewis many times. But Max Verstappen actually said that, well, he said he doesn't agree with it. It comes down to the fact that um, in any sport, people make mistakes. He needed more support coming from the place where he came from. He didn't have enough support in the director's room, in the, I want to say, the control room. But yeah, he spoke about that, that he feel that it was unfair that he was sacked, that he should have been given more support, and the fact that the team principals were allowed to scream in the race director's ears, that was something that Formula One allowed. I always say you teach people how to treat you, right? So if you teach people how to treat you and you complain about the way they treat you, eventually, sort of a little bit too little too late, right? You should not have allowed it in the first place. I know it's easier said than done, but that's sort of where you want to get to in life. Then interesting, day 3, driver's reaction. Again, don't know what the question was, but I guess it was something, how was the day out there, whatever the case might be. Lewis, again, it's not been the easiest or smooth running. Obstacles is, so I'm just picking out, I'm not going to repeat all the exact question, but picking out the phrases and the words that stood out. There's obstacles to overcome. We go through as much as we could. It's like, we have to go through this thing. We want more laps. A little bit behind is the words he uses, and working our way through it. So if you look at the analogy of when you ever ask a person how's it going, and people complain about something, they might say, oh yeah, but that's okay, we're working our way through it. It's almost like it's the struggle to go through everything. Then they had the pre-season testing in Bahrain. Again, the journalist on the 10th of March, interview on the 10th of March, drivers press conference. Journalists ask, what's the goal for you? If to Max Verstappen, what's the goal for you and the team at this final pre-season test? Max Verstappen straight to the point, laps. They want to understand the car more. They want more laps, and then that's the main priority, he said. So, and he speaks about what you understand from the car and what he needs to do and what he want to get out of the car. Um, ask him, are there a lot of upgrades this week? He said maybe. He didn't speak about. You could have said yes, no, maybe. So he gave a straight up answer. I can just imagine what Lewis would have said, but then driver's day 2 reaction, just reaction, not the press conference. Yeah, it's actually a copy of the other video, but again, don't know what they asked, but again, Lewis mentioned words like we're just working through things, trying to figure out, hold on to the down. We are holding on, well, holding on to the downforce, but holding on. People might say, but yeah, that's how they speak, but you could have said anything else, like understanding the downforce more or whatever the case might be, but like hold on, it's a metaphor of movement in terms of struggle when you try to hold on to something. He said it's difficult out there, bumpy, slippery, it's sand, it's too hot, it's dusty. So everything is just this. Now, there were talks of everything over the 2 testing weekends where the Mercedes is just sandbagging, the whole testing experience. Because they did it previous years and then they come out guns blazing in the first championship. So it's possible that they could have done it. They should have rehearsed mentally. It would take a lot of effort to rehearse. What are you going to say in a press conference? First of all, I would not waste my athlete's mental game on that nonsense. Almost said a different word. Like coaching him through what he needs to say so that it looks like we have trouble, and then we don't. I would not do that. But then also, even if they are sandbagging or they did sandbag the whole 2 testing weekends, you don't want to, from a mental perspective, tell yourself these things, because the moment you speak it, you're actually convincing yourself of it. You don't want to do that. Okay, so 12 March testing interview. Again, uh, don't know what the question was, but Lewis said no, they're not the quickest at the moment. They're not on top. Where Max Verstappen would say we get on top, we are on top, he would clear we're not on top. So in his mind, like below. It's tough out there. Again, he says it's windy. Again, it says it's tough out there. There's the wind. They need to get behind the bouncing. It worse. The word is what he's using. Working through lots of different scenarios. It's just like this constant battle in his mind. Again, if he was coached to say that, to make people believe that they are struggling, I would not waste my athlete's mental capacity on something like that. And he did say not quite happy, but interesting, he said, but we're trying to tame her. Speaking of the car as her, so we'll see where that goes throughout the season. It's a different machine. It's this big thing that they need to overcome. He speaks about hurdles. Use the word hurdles. It's not a smooth run. So yeah, I think you get what I'm saying. speaks about every. So then the journalist asked him, "You've completed your last test mileage. What sort of shape are you and your team in, you think?" And then he just said, "We got through the testing program. We had decent reliability, which has been positive." First time he mentions that whatever they did was at a positive, some sort of positive outcome. Then he immediately went away and said, "I think everyone is struggling out on this bumpy track, and we come out, and the people, everybody else come out knowing we have a lot of work to do." Again, speaking about other people. But then the journalist asked him, "Well, you say you got a lot of work to do. Is there an underlying confidence still within the team?" And then he said, "There's confidence that we can always work through whatever problem we're facing is." Again, it's a little bit more of an internal type of mindset question, not a technical question around his driving capabilities or the car or the team. And immediately you could see the state change. And I'll go through this at some point, because what happens is his face lit up, his eyes open up, and you can see he's in almost like in a space of centeredness when he speaks about that. And then they ask him, "And so if we were to go racing tomorrow, pole position and race win, or where do you think you'd end up?" Immediately, his state changed. I almost want to say back to that Lewis that don't want to go there type of thing. Now, again, whether it's deliberate or not, it's just not. I don't see how I would want my athlete to sort of be in that tug of war with their own emotions, right? Irrespective of who's asking him to give the answers or whether it's coming from himself. That doesn't really matter. Yeah, so then he just go on. Yeah, and that's sort of the end of the interviews. Again, what's going to happen, sort of a baseline, what's going to happen over the season this year will be interesting to see and to watch and to follow. And I will pick a third driver and the team principals. I still need to go. I'm not going to do the testing weekends and the interviews with the team principals. I'll start doing that after their first race this weekend. But I still need to pick a third driver. I know I'm biased probably based on what happened last year. Just the fact that Max Verstappen is much more mature in the words that he uses, much more, he might be fearless is the word I'm looking for. He's definitely a fearless person, but he knows what he wants. Where he's like almost like Lewis is like he's not quite sure where he stands, and you see that when he speaks about and use metaphors and terminology like we don't know where we stand and stuff like that. So that you can definitely see. Um, so yeah, I'm biased. I'll pick a third person. Um, if you have an idea who I should pick, but it should be somebody that's fairly fluent in English. Um, if it's hard for them to speak English, which might be their second or even their third language, it might not necessarily be easy to pick these things up. I should still be able to pick up things from their body language. But yeah, so have a think. I'll think about that and see what comes out of this weekend. So yeah, let's embark on this journey. I think based on what we might find over the next few weeks, we can make a pretty decent prediction from a mental perspective, whom I think is in a better position to win this season and who can come out on top this season. But yeah, let's see how things go. I'll speak to you at the end after this weekend. Don't forget, Sunday afternoon, the first race of the Formula One 2022 season kicks off. And I'll speak to you guys next week. Bye.